Welcome to today's lesson. Today is talking about function machines. We're doing lesson 1.2.1. We're going to have a couple slides that goes over some definitions and some general information that you'll want to take notes on. And then we're going to look into a couple questions in the book. So let's start off with functions. First and foremost, we're going to read something over here from the book. It says, a function works like a machine. As shown in the diagram below, a function is given a name that can be a letter, such as G or F. A notation, f of x, represents the output when x is processed by the machine. Note, again, we read that as f of x, not f parentheses x. When x is put into a machine, f of x, the value of the function for a specific x value comes out. In this notation, f of x replaces y. For example, notice over here we have a little machine. We have a guy, he's taking this machine, he's putting a 3 in, and the answer that he's getting out is going to be an 8. Okay, think about like baking or something. You have all these like little ingredients, you put them all together, you end up with a cake at the end. Same thing with a function. They give you an equation. You're going to start with an input value of like x equals 3. If I take that x equals 3 and I plug it into my equation, 3 times 3 is 9, minus 1 is 8. So notice the notation f of 3. 3 is the number that we plugged in. That's why it's in this parentheses. 8 is the number we are getting out. So 3 is my input, 8 is my output. Let's look at that on a slideshow. So that way you can fill out, so maybe you can pause it and take some notes. The input is the number you feed into the expression or plug into the expression. The output is the number after the work or calculations are finished. So that's almost like your answer that you're getting out of the equation. Input is always represented with an x. So on a graph, it's the x-axis. In an equation, it's x. Whenever you see it written with the f and then the parentheses and the x like this, whatever the number is right inside of here, let me make that a different color so that way you know. So this x, whatever the number is right here, this is your input. So if it says f of 3, it's telling you 3 is the number to plug in. 3 is your input in this problem. The actual answer that you get out of this, so whatever f of x actually equals, oh sorry, that's a bad f, but whatever f of x actually equals, that is going to be your output. So the output can be either represented with a y or the whole f of x. Either one of these can represent your output, whereas x represents your input. So when you get an equation, the equation may say f of x equals 4. That means 4 is your output, and whatever number is right here is your input. So, again, let me change it one more time. So let's say that we have an equation and it says f of 3 equals -2. This 3 is the x value, which means it's your input. That means you took an equation and you plugged in a 3, and the answer that you got out of it, your output, is a -2. So that's the difference between an input and an output. So now let's go back over to the book and look at a couple of these examples. So again, we kind of just did this example together. They took a 3, they plugged it in. So if I take and I plug in that 3 right here, 3 times 3. Again, this 3 was the one that's already right here. This 3 is the one that we are plugging in, minus 1. So 3 times 3 is 9. 9 minus 1 is 8. That's where they got their output of 8. So now notice the next part of this equation says, calculate the output for f of x equals 3x minus 1. So this is our equation when the input is 14. So this is saying, let's plug 14 in here. So again, I can rewrite that. I can do 3 times 14 minus 1. So again, we're going to start off, we're going to do our 3 times 14, and we will end up with 42. Then we can subtract 1 from that, and we will end up with 41. The way that we can write that answer, obviously, we can just say our output, our answer is 41. Sometimes they'll write it in the same sentence that they had before. So they can say f of 14, because that's the input. We inputted 14, and what we got out was 41. So we plugged in 14, we got out 41. Notice it says, now find the value of f of negative 10. Again, the number inside the parentheses is your input, so that means we are going to plug in a negative 10. So again, we have these parentheses. Anytime we have parentheses, that really means to multiply. So 3 times a negative 10 is negative 30. And negative 30 minus 1 is a negative 31. So that would be our answer for this second part. Now this third part is a little bit different because instead of giving me the parentheses, the input, it gives me something different. So it says if the output of the function is 24. So it's telling me that the output is 24. And it's asking me what value would I plug in here if the answer I get is 24. So what number can I plug in here for x to end up with it equaling 24? Okay, well, in our first chapter, we learned how to solve an equation. So one thing we could do is solve this equation. The other thing is we could kind of guess and check. We could say, okay, well, let's try 5. If I plug in a 5 here, 5 times 3 is 15. 15 minus 1 is 14. Okay, so that's not 24. So let's go something a little bit bigger. Let's try 8. 8 times 3 is 24, but minus 1 is not. Okay, so you can guess and check. The other way you can do it, again, is like we did in the last chapter. We can solve an equation. So we want to get this one over here because we want the x by itself. So we are going to add 1 to both sides. Okay, so then we will get 3x on this side. Sorry that it's over the letters. And then 24 plus 1 is 25 on this side. And then we want to get this x by itself. It's being multiplied by 3, so we're going to again do the opposite, which is dividing. And we can either, one, get a fraction and we can leave it as 25 thirds. Or, if we really wanted to, we could write that as a decimal, and 25 thirds would be 8.3. So either one of these would be acceptable answers for this problem. But again, notice these first two, they told you what the input is, so you just plugged in the input here. This one, they told you what the output is, so you needed to set up an equation and work backwards to figure out what you plugged in there. We're going to look at 2 more really quick equations. Or 2 more really quick things, and then this video will be done. So first and foremost, I want to tell you or show you this. You're going to have pictures like this on your assignment as well. The only difference is instead of using words, they just use a picture. You still have an equation. It still gives you an input up here. So this is again telling me I'm going to take and I'm going to plug in a -3. So -2 times -3 plus 4. And then I'm looking for my output or my answer. Whereas this one over here, notice it doesn't give me my input, it gives me my output. So this is like that last problem we did where we want to set up an equation to solve. And then the last and final one that we want to look at, give me a second to scroll down. Sorry. A lot of scrolling, okay. The last and final one is, again, they're not going to give you a picture, they're going to give it to you in words. So notice 139 says, if f of x equals this, and it gives us our equation. It doesn't really look like an equation because it's just a 2 with the exponent of x, but it's still an equation. And then it tells us plug in these three numbers. So it says find the value of f of 1. So we're going to take this and we are going to plug in a 1. Okay, well 2 to the first power equals 2. So my answer for this first one would be 2. Okay, so then we're going to take that same equation and we're going to plug in a 3 this time. So we're going to plug in a 3. Okay, 2 to the third, so 2 times 2 times 2 is going to be 8. And again, for these, especially with the exponents, we can use a calculator. And then our last one, this one just says we're going to plug in a t. Well, we can't really solve for a t. So in this case, we wouldn't have an actual answer, we would just have another equation. So those are the three types of problems that you're going to be seeing on the assignment that you're going to be completing in the next few minutes. You will either see an actual diagram where you have to plug in a number. I'm going to take this 8 and I'm going to plug it into the equation and figure out what my answer is. Or it'll be written out. Find the value of this if you are plugging in this input.